Here is something almost nobody in the music press caught in real time. While every camera, every push notification, and every trending tab on the planet was busy tracking the same handful of pop stars fighting for attention this year, a completely different kind of power move was being assembled in total silence, and it didn't happen on a stage, in a studio, or on a chart. It happened inside a conference room with the National Basketball Players Association, and the man sitting at the center of it wasn't holding a microphone. He was holding a pitch deck. His name is Kendrick Lamar. And what Kendrick Lamar just helped build is not a song, not a feature, not a surprise drop. It is an entirely new economic structure for how NBA players get paid outside the court, and it premiered not on ESPN, not on a sports network, but on the red carpet at the Cannes Lions International Festival of Creativity, the same stage where the advertising industry's biggest ideas of the year get unveiled. If that sentence sounds strange, sit with it, because it should. A basketball union just launched its future at a film festival, and the man they trusted to build it was a rapper who has spent the last several years quietly turning himself into something far bigger than a rapper. So let's rewind, because to understand why this matters, you need to understand exactly what just happened, who was in the room, and why the entire architecture of athlete pay is now getting rewritten with Kendrick Lamar's fingerprints all over the blueprint. And once you see the full shape of it, you'll understand why so many people inside music and inside sports are calling this one of the most quietly consequential business moves of the year, not because of what was said publicly, but because of how little was said publicly while it was happening. For years, the loudest question about Kendrick Lamar wasn't about music. It was about absence. No interviews. No press tours. No algorithm feeding content dumps. While other artists were posting, performing, and promoting on a non-stop loop just to stay visible, Kendrick Lamar went quiet in the exact way that made casual observers assume something was wrong. It wasn't. Kendrick Lamar was doing something almost nobody bothered to notice, because it didn't look like content. It looked like paperwork. And paperwork, as it turns out, was the whole point. On June 22, 2026, the National Basketball Players Association pulled back the curtain on a project called PLYRS UNTD, a brand new, consumer-facing commercial arm designed to replace the union's old business-to-business operation, Think 450. This is not a small rebrand. This is the NBPA formally declaring that it no longer wants to simply license out its players' name, image, and likeness to outside companies. It wants to own the entire commercial pipeline itself, on behalf of more than 500 players. Fred Van Vliet, the NBPA's president, put it plainly, PLYRS UNTD was born out of our desire to own a piece of the ecosystem we built, and we intend to bring fans to a side of the business that truly reflects player culture. David Kelly, the union's incoming executive director and the newly named CEO of PLYRS UNTD, went even further, framing it as a total philosophical reset. Instead of just renting out player talent to the league and teams, we're operating as the enterprise itself, using our unified voice to build equity and drive the market. Read that twice. The players are no longer positioning themselves as labor for hire. They are positioning themselves as the business. And Keisha Wright, the NBPA's senior vice president of partnerships, spelled out exactly why that distinction matters in her own words. We represent the most recognizable, inspirational, aspirational athletes in the world, who have been lending their IP and influence to build other brands for so long. It is time for us to flip the script and use that IP and influence to build their own brand. That is not corporate spin. That is a union openly admitting that for decades, the athletes generated the cultural value and somebody else kept the largest share of the profit from it. PLYRS UNTD is the union's attempt to close that gap permanently, and it needed a creative partner who had already solved that exact problem for himself. And here is where Kendrick Lamar enters the frame, because the union didn't build the creative identity of this launch internally, and it didn't hire a traditional Madison Avenue ad agency either. It brought in Project 3 Agency, the client-facing arm of pgLang, the company Kendrick Lamar co-founded with his longtime creative partner Dave Free back in 2020. From day one, pgLang described itself in deliberately strange terms: not a record label, not a movie studio, not a management company, but a service company built to give artists total creative and financial control over their own work. 6 years later, that description looks less like branding language and more like a mission statement that quietly came true. Project 3 Agency was built specifically to take on outside client work, and the NBA Players Association became one of its highest-profile assignments to date, following on the heels of Project 3's creative direction work on Adidas' 2026 World Cup kit campaign, which put Kendrick Lamar and Dave Free's fingerprints on a global sports moment before this one even happened. The centerpiece of the PLYRS UNTD launch is a short film called Own the Game, produced by Project 3 Agency and narrated by 9-time NBA All-Star Kyrie Irving. It debuted not at a press conference, not during a nationally televised game, but at the Cannes Lions International Festival of Creativity, the same event where the world's biggest advertising and film ideas get judged by an audience of executives and creative directors, not sports fans. That alone should tell you how this project was positioned. It wasn't packaged as a league promo. It was packaged as cinema. And when you actually watch it, the choice makes sense. The film is shot in black and white. It leans into stillness, patience, and quiet close-ups instead of the frantic highlight reel editing that has defined NBA marketing since the Jordan and Gatorade era of the 1990s. The only sound cue tying it back to basketball at all is the rhythm of a ball dribbling underneath the visuals. Over that restrained, almost documentary tone, Kyrie Irving delivers the film's thesis in voiceover: different cities, different backgrounds, different stories, same love, no middlemen, no gatekeepers, just players deciding what happens with what they build, turning visibility into leverage, turning reach into opportunity, turning culture into something that finally benefits the players. That is not a tagline. That is a manifesto, and it was written to be delivered by the one player in the league whose entire public identity has been built around refusing to let anyone else control his image, his brand, or his message. Kyrie Irving isn't a random face the union grabbed for star power. Kyrie Irving has spent over a decade building and defending his own footwear line, controlling his own media appearances, and rejecting narratives he didn't personally sign off on, which makes him arguably the single most ideologically aligned NBA superstar. Kendrick Lamar's team could have chosen to carry this message. And there's a deeper thread here that longtime fans will recognize immediately. Kendrick Lamar name-checked Kyrie Irving directly on the 2022 album, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, on the track, Savior, referencing the very public scrutiny Kyrie Irving faced during his vaccine mandate standoff with the league. That wasn't a friendly shout-out at the time, it was a pointed lyric about independence and public pressure. Years later, the two men are standing on the same side of a much bigger project about exactly that theme: independence from gatekeepers. Think about the symbolism of that pairing for a second. Kendrick Lamar once put Kyrie Irving's name into a verse about resisting outside pressure. Now Kyrie Irving is the literal voice reading Kendrick Lamar's creative team's script about resisting outside pressure, at Cannes, in front of the global advertising industry. That is not a coincidence a good creative director lets slip through. That is a callback, deliberately built into the casting, for anyone paying close enough attention to catch it. The film's roster reads like a cross-section of the league's most bankable stars: Jaylen Brown, Jalen Brunson, Stephen Curry, Kawhi Leonard, Jamal Murray, Karl Anthony Towns, Donovan Mitchell, Denny Avdija, and Jalen Duren, among others. 22 players in total, 11 of them current or former All-Stars, 9 of them 2026 All-Star selections specifically. That is not a marketing afterthought. That is the union assembling its most recognizable faces and handing the entire creative direction of the campaign to Kendrick Lamar's team rather than to any of the sports marketing giants that usually get first call on projects at this scale. Beyond the film itself, several of these same players are woven into the broader PLYRS UNTD rollout in other ways. Chet Holmgren and Chris Paul were involved in shaping the design of the union's new Los Angeles performance facility, and Kyle Kuzma has been connected to an early iteration of the brand's PLYRS House concept. This isn't a one-day photo shoot dressed up as a movement. It's a layered, multi-month rollout with player fingerprints embedded at every level, and Kendrick Lamar's creative team sits at the center of tying it all together visually. One name on that list is worth sitting with a little longer: Stephen Curry. For years, Stephen Curry's public friendship with Drake has been one of the most visible crossover relationships between hip-hop and basketball: courtside embraces, shared appearances, a widely documented bond that even includes Drake having Curry's jersey number tattooed on his body. It is a well-established, long-running relationship, and it's worth noting plainly, without turning it into more than what it is: Stephen Curry appearing at the center of a Kendrick Lamar-produced union campaign, narrated by Kyrie Irving, is an interesting data point about where some of the league's biggest stars are choosing to lend their image right now, not evidence of any personal rift, but a genuinely notable moment for anyone who has followed the last 2 years of hip-hop's biggest storyline. To be clear about what we actually know and what we don't, there is no public reporting, no statement, and no confirmed source indicating that Stephen Curry's involvement in this campaign was framed by anyone, the union, Stephen Curry himself, or Kendrick Lamar's team, as a statement about Drake in any way. What we do know, on the record, is that Steph Curry is one of 22 players who agreed to put his image behind a Kendrick Lamar-directed creative vision for how NBA players should be marketed going forward. Whatever inference anyone draws from that is speculation. The verified fact is simply this: the players picked Kendrick Lamar's team to define their brand identity, and Steph Curry is one of the faces of that decision. Because let's be honest about what that storyline actually was. In 2024, Kendrick Lamar and Drake were locked in one of the most publicized rap feuds in modern music history, trading diss tracks that escalated from lyrical shots to explosive, headline-grabbing allegations on both sides. It reached its most viral peak when Kendrick Lamar performed "Not Like Us" at the Super Bowl 59 halftime show in February 2025, in front of one of the largest television audiences on the planet, a performance that turned a rap battle into a genuinely mainstream cultural event, complete with guest appearances from SZA, Samuel L. Jackson, and tennis champion Serena Williams. Drake later filed a defamation lawsuit against his own label, Universal Music Group, alleging the label helped promote a song built on false claims. A federal judge dismissed that lawsuit in October 2025, and Drake has since filed an appeal that is still working its way through the courts. That legal battle remains unresolved and very public. So when people ask why Kendrick Lamar seemed to vanish from the public conversation after that Super Bowl performance, the honest answer is that he didn't vanish, he simply stopped operating in the register that keeps most artists visible. There were no follow-up interviews explaining the victory lap. No think pieces personally authored. No social media campaign milking the Super Bowl moment for engagement. Kendrick Lamar let the performance stand on its own and moved on to the next project, and it turns out the next project wasn't a song at all. It was this. Now hold both of these threads at once. On one side, Drake, still fighting a very public legal battle stemming directly from that feud, still operating in the traditional model of albums, rollout cycles, and media cycles that depend on constant visibility to stay in the conversation. On the other side, Kendrick Lamar, who spent the same period saying almost nothing publicly, while quietly building an entirely separate track record, a Super Bowl halftime show performance watched by tens of millions, a record-setting Grammy Haul, an independent creative agency taking on Adidas' biggest global campaign, and now, a foundational role in reshaping how professional basketball players get paid outside the arena. Two artists, two completely different definitions of how to stay powerful in 2026. One is measured in streams and press cycles. The other is measured in ownership structures. That distinction is the real story here, and it's bigger than any beef. Because what makes pgLang and Project 3 Agency different from almost every other artist-adjacent business in music isn't that Kendrick Lamar has money, plenty of rappers have money. It's that pgLang has never been a subsidiary of a larger corporate parent the way so many artist ventures ultimately become. Compare it to the most famous precedent in hip-hop business history. Jay-Z built Roc Nation into a genuine empire, but Roc Nation's touring arm has long been threaded through Live Nation, and Jay-Z's streaming platform, Tidal, was eventually absorbed into Jack Dorsey's Square. Jay-Z built something enormous, but he built it while still operating partly inside somebody else's corporate machine. pgLang and Project 3 Agency, by contrast, are fully independent, no parent company, no licensing arrangement dressed up as a partnership, just a self-contained creative business that outside institutions now come to instead of the other way around. This is the same instinct that drove pgLang's very first public statement back in 2020, when Kendrick Lamar and Dave Free introduced the company by explicitly refusing to let anyone categorize it. Not a record label. Not a movie studio. Not a publishing house. The company's own language was almost defiant about resisting classification, because classification, in the entertainment industry, usually comes with a corporate parent attached. 6 years on, Project 3 Agency landing both a global Adidas World Cup campaign and now the NBA's flagship union rebrand in the same 12-month stretch is the clearest evidence yet that refusing classification didn't slow pgLang down. It made pgLang harder to compete with, because there's no shareholder structure above Kendrick Lamar and Dave Free forcing creative compromises the way there often is at the larger agencies competing for the same contracts. That's the part of this story that deserves the most attention, and it's the part almost nobody outside the industry is talking about yet. The NBA Players Association didn't hire Kendrick Lamar's team because they wanted a celebrity stamp on a press release. They hired Project 3 Agency because the union is trying to do, structurally, exactly what Kendrick Lamar has already done for himself: take a group of extraordinarily talented, extraordinarily visible people, and cut out the layers of middlemen who have historically taken the largest cut of the value those people create. The players have a combined social media reach of roughly 680 million followers, according to the union's own figures, 8 times larger than the league's own audience. For decades, that reach mostly got monetized by shoe companies, broadcasters, and licensing deals negotiated on the players' behalf, not directly by them. PLYRS UNTD, and the Cannes-premiered film introducing it, is the union's attempt to flip that entirely, build the fan relationship directly, sell merchandise directly, license content directly, open a player-owned, 24/7 performance center in Los Angeles this summer, and stage recurring cultural events like the PLYRS House Experience, which already debuted at NBA All-Star 2026 with brand activations including NBA 2K, Maker's Mark, and Sony, all without needing a single outside gatekeeper to greenlight it first. The next edition of that same activation is scheduled for the 2026 NBA Summer League in July at MGM Resorts, a partner the union says opened its space without even requesting a formal marketing brief first, which, if you're tracking the theme here, is exactly the kind of trust-based, gatekeeper-free arrangement PLYRS UNTD was built to normalize. Keisha Wright put the union's ambition in almost provocative terms when describing how PLYRS UNTD is meant to coexist with the league itself. The league does a good job with 48 minutes on the court. We're not trying to compete with them. We're focusing on the 23 hours and 12 minutes that exists beyond it. That's the entire strategic thesis in one sentence. The NBA owns the game, but PLYRS UNTD wants to own everything else, and it hired Kendrick Lamar's team to visually define what that everything else identity should feel like. And the person the union picked to visually define what ownership without gatekeepers should even look like on screen was Kendrick Lamar's team. Not because Kendrick Lamar is the highest paid name in music. Not because of any single song. Because Kendrick Lamar built the exact independent operating model the players are now trying to build for themselves, and the union apparently decided the fastest way to learn that model was to hand him the camera. That is the quiet, undramatic, but genuinely enormous story sitting underneath all of this. Kendrick Lamar didn't need a diss track this time. Kendrick Lamar didn't need an album rollout, a magazine cover, or a single viral tweet. Kendrick Lamar let a union of 500 professional athletes hand him the creative keys to their entire commercial future, and let the paperwork speak for itself. While plenty of artists are still measuring success in press cycles, streaming numbers, and how loudly they can occupy a news cycle for 24 hours, Kendrick Lamar's team just helped architect something that is built to generate value for the players, and for pgLang's own growing footprint in sports and fashion, for years after this particular news cycle is forgotten. So here's the real question worth sitting with, and it's the one the industry will likely spend the next few years actually answering. If the most powerful union in professional basketball looked across every advertising holding company, every Hollywood studio, and every traditional sports marketing shop in the country and still chose an independent creative agency built by a rapper, what does that say about where cultural power is actually concentrating right now? Is this a one-off collaboration, or is it the opening chapter of a much bigger shift? One where athletes, musicians, and other high-visibility public figures increasingly bypass the traditional entertainment industrial complex entirely and build directly with each other instead. It's worth stating clearly that no other professional sports union has announced a similar arrangement with Kendrick Lamar's team as of this reporting, so any talk of the NFL, the WNBA, or other leagues following this exact playbook is speculation, not confirmed fact. But it's speculation grounded in a fairly obvious pattern. Player unions across professional sports have spent the last several years pushing harder on nil rights, direct-to-consumer models, and reduced dependence on legacy sponsorship structures. The NBPA just produced the highest profile, most creatively distinctive example of that push to date, and it did so by partnering with an independent artist-owned agency instead of a legacy marketing conglomerate. Whether that becomes a template other unions actively study, or simply a standout case study people reference for years without directly copying it, is genuinely an open question, and one worth revisiting the next time a major athletes union announces a rebrand of its own. Kendrick Lamar has spent the better part of 2 years being asked, publicly and repeatedly, where he'd gone. The honest answer, it turns out, has almost nothing to do with music at all. Kendrick Lamar was in a room with the NBA Players Association, building something that a lot of people are only now starting to notice existed. Watch this space, because if pgLang, Project 3 agency, and Kendrick Lamar's model of total creative independence keep getting handed the keys to institutions this large, the next few years of celebrity business could look very different from anything the last 2 decades trained us to expect. What do you think? Is this the start of a genuine shift in how athletes and artists build wealth together, or just one high-profile campaign that will fade once the news cycle moves on? Drop your take in the comments, and if this breakdown gave you something you weren't getting from the mainstream sports or music coverage, like the video, subscribe for more of these deep dives, and stick around, because there is a lot more unpacking to do on where Kendrick Lamar's independent empire goes from here.